went deaf, huh?
In my right ear. I have been years in my right ear, and it's.
Sim is deaf in one ear.
Ooh.
Sim?
Okay, yeah. And mine, I started noticing it. Gosh, it's been 15 years ago. The alarm on the house, you know, beep, beep, beep. All of a sudden, I couldn't hear it. And then I started to have what I call knockdown episodes, where I'd literally, I stepped out of a golf cart, golf, and I went to the ground. And I've been driving and had burritos, and literally I had to white knuckle, get off the side of the road, and call Gloria, come get me. But I haven't had a knockdown episode in about 10 years. They started giving me some Valium before it took me. But I stopped that. So it doesn't bother me other than I'm 98% deaf in my right ear. On occasion, I wear a hearing aid, and it's an electrical hearing aid. It's to take stuff on this side and transfer it to the microphone on this side. So, you know, it's, yeah, it is. Do what?
So I'll just introduce you.
Okay,
Pull
I'll
some
take
things
it
off
from there.
your bio, and then I'll let you introduce yourself. So,
Did I write the bio?
I got off the website, off the Simpson company's website.
Good.
Unless y'all are under the wrong names.
Do what now?
When the screen was up, you were under Bill's name, so that matters.
We're gonna have to live with it like this.
Yes, sir.
If you win SIOR, only had to take about 3. All right, guys, I need you to say something.
All you have to do is the volume.
Yeah. I need you to say something that you haven't already said to my 2 remaining clients.
Huh?
I'm gonna write it down.
You got a good pen?
Nobody else will know what I'm lying.
Oh. You had a good year, Kurt, but even more so. You know, where you having a good year?
everything's good, but just shut the laptop when you're done speaking, so,
Okay.
and then I'll slowly turn off so it doesn't
Okay.
mess up the video.
Gotcha.
Appreciate
Gotcha.
it.
Yep. Well, good morning. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here today. We've got a very informative program lined up. Before we get started, just a few quick announcements. First of all, when you came into the parking deck today, you should have received a parking ticket. On your way out, please see the front desk out in the main lobby. They will validate that ticket for you. Looking ahead, we have several educational opportunities remaining for the year, including a 101 class coming up August 21st through the 24th. We'll also be having a 102 class September 11th through the 14th, and a 103 class November 6th through the 9th. We'll also be hosting a Foundations for Success in Commercial Real Estate class, which is just a 2-day class focusing on the basics of commercial investment real estate. That will be held October 9th and 10th. And we'll also be holding a Site to Do Business training class on September 21st at the Atlanta Realtor Center, which will also be a continuing education opportunity. So please continue to spread the word on these classes to your colleagues and associates. Later this month, the Georgia chapter will be sponsoring and participating in the Georgia Society of CPA's Southeastern Accounting Show to be held on August 30th and 31st. We are doing this as part of our designation promotion efforts, and we are very excited to be able to promote the CCIM brand to a very influential group of professionals in the region. Looking forward to our September program. Our programs committee has put together a fantastic program focusing on the proposed Park Over 400, and will feature a panel of representatives from the Buckhead CID, Gwinnett Place CID, and the Midtown Alliance. That program will be held here at the Terraces on the morning of September 14th. And looking ahead to November, we'll also be holding our 12th annual Economic Forecast Luncheon on November 16th. This is our annual signature event. Last year we had approximately 300 in attendance, and our speaker will once again be Mr. John Doggett from the University of Texas. We are now fully promoting our table sponsorship opportunities with early bird pricing ending on August 31st. So if you are interested in purchasing a table, please see me or our chapter administrator, Kelly Mills, or our website for additional information. With that, we will go ahead and get started with this morning's program. Our program coordinator today is Mr. Les Johnston, CCIM. Les has been a licensed real estate professional since 1983, joining King Industrial Realty in 1990, where he became vice president in 2001. Les then joined the Simpson Company in 2004, specializing in the sale and leasing of industrial property. Les was awarded the Atlanta Commercial Board of Realtors Phoenix Award in 2002. He received a CCIM designation in 1998, also serving as president of the CCIM Georgia chapter in 2007. Les is a graduate of the University of Georgia and a longtime resident of Gainesville, where he resides with his wife, Gloria. Let's all give a welcome to Les.
I usually don't need a microphone, but it's for the video part. We'll use it. Well, good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Andrew. It is an honor and pleasure to have with us today Bill Johnston. He's an industrial broker with King Industrial. I'll give you a little information about him, and then some of the comments that people have said over the years about Bill, and then we'll get into our program. What we're going to do is just, Bill and I are going to talk up here. I'm going to ask probably a lot of questions. He might even ask me one or two. You're welcome toward the end of the program. We'll open it up for questions from the audience. Feel free to ask anything you'd like about industrial real estate, not motorcycles. But it's a pleasure to have Bill here. But let me give you a little information about Bill. Bill has been the top producing associate at King Industrial Realty every year since 1988. In 1991, he became vice president, and in 2008 became senior vice president. In 2015, along with 5 other King agents, purchased the company from its founder, Charlie King. Since 1992, he has generated leases and sales of over 1 million square feet a year. Mr. Johnson was admitted to the Bill. Yeah. Bill was admitted to the Society of Office and Industrial Realtors, SIOR, in 1991. In 1996, he was awarded the Phoenix Award by the Atlanta Commercial Board of Realtors for 10 consecutive years of multi-million-dollar production, and in 2011, the Silver Phoenix Award for 25 years of consecutive years. He also was graduated from Georgia Southwestern College, cum laude. Pretty smart boy. Well, I don't know. Bill's assistant sent me a recap of some of the comments that people have said about Bill over the years. I'm just going to read a few of them. I don't know how many people know Robert Patillo, but Robert's not one to wax verbosely about anyone or anything. But Robert said this: Lou Holtz, the football coach, has 3 questions he asks before he enters any relationship with a player, coach, or associate in life. Can I trust you? Are you committed to excellence? Do you care about me as a person? As far as I'm concerned, Bill can answer yes to all 3 of these experiences. Another one with Richard Stowe with Lanier Worldwide. Your knowledge of the Atlanta real estate market coupled with your negotiating ability allowed us to structure what I believe is an extremely competitive lease under difficult market conditions. It is refreshing to work with an individual who exemplifies performance and quality in his profession as you do. Thanks again for another transaction with outstanding results. There's 2 or 3 pages here that I could go on and on, but Bill is a professional, and he has been there, done that, and I consider him a friend. So welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm going to start asking some questions, and he and I are going to talk about it. Like I said, at the end, you're welcome to, we'll put it up to the audience. Years ago, when I started with King, about 80% of the deals were 20,000 square feet and less. Is that still the trend?
Yes. Quarter in, quarter out, every quarter, the bulk of the deals, by the number of deals, is less than 20,000 square feet. It's 60, 70% of the total market. Now, it's, and I didn't bring, we have a good quarterly presentation we put out, gives you some historical, but the chart, if you counting by the number of deals, not by the square footage, is way up here on the smaller space and way down here on the bigger space. And if you get up to 40,000 and below, it's like 85% of all transactions are below that square footage. Now, if you're looking at the square foot absorbed, then it's a U shape. You've got the below 40, really high is number of square footage. The middle tier from 40 to 200 or so thousand is lower, and then because of the e-commerce trend and all the mega warehouses, you've got enormous square foot absorbed on the other side of the graph, or number of deals, when you're going by square footage. So the first one is number of transactions. The second one is just based on the total square footage.
So 2 and 3 would be some of your mega buildings as far as number of deals on square footage?
In any given quarter, probably, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Talk about the geographical areas in Metro Atlanta that are thriving, and what areas are not.
There are no areas that are not at the moment. The market's tight everywhere, every sub-market, some worse than others, but it's generally tight everywhere. The big 3 markets always have been and always will be, just the sheer number of buildings and square footage in those markets, are the Northeast market, which is the single largest market. It's over 100 million square feet. The Southwest market, which includes Fulton Industrial and on out I-20 West, and then the I-75 leg, which captures the airport and south all the way down to McDonough with the big boxes. Those, day in, day out, are the big activity, big leasing numbers. So those is sheer amount of deals and square footage absorbed. Those just being the 3 biggest markets, those are the 3 that you'll see the most activity, but the rest of them are tight. 400, you can't find space. Surprisingly, I-20 East is one of the tightest markets in Atlanta, and that's a market that's been overlooked for a lot of years.
Does that include Snapfinger?
Include Snapfinger. For the first time, Snapfinger's getting full, and that's the first time in my 33 years.
Do the lease rates reflect this activity?
Absolutely. Most of my business is tenant rep. I list a few, usually family-owned properties. I don't do a lot of institutional listing. And my life's been hard the last few years because most of the renewals that I'm doing today were put in place during the heart of the downturn. And we're seeing dramatic rent increases and, 25% or more from the lease rates they were paying. And that's painful for my clients because most of their businesses are not up 25% or so. And I suspect that's probably going to continue.
A 20,000 square foot building, again, this is kind of like how much is a car, but where are those rates falling in these good areas?
That varies pretty dramatically by area. You still have a pretty good delta between the Northeast market and the airport market. Airport market a lot of times can be driven by location to the airport. They need to be close, so they don't mind paying more rent as long as it cuts their stem time, the time from the truck from there to the air cargo terminal. So those rates will be higher. 20,000 square feet, Northeast, low end, $475 net, high end, $6. Airport would be similar. Fulton Industrial would lag behind that some. Now, if you throw in, you've got a pretty good demarcation line at the Chattahoochee River. It's always been more expensive on the other side of the river, but even Fulton has, for the first time in my career, Fulton Industrial's in single-digit vacancy rates. It has, for virtually all my career, been up around 20%, and it's down in the single digits. So Fulton, 20,000 square feet, is going to be in the mid-3s to maybe 4. The other side of the river, which would be Thornton Road, Riverside Parkway, and there, you're going to be in the mid-4s there.
I work predominantly in the Northeast, and 2,000 to 10,000 square feet, it's just not there. There's very few spaces, C and D maybe, but is that pretty predominant throughout the entire metro Atlanta?
I would say so. It's and of course certain markets like the Fulton I-20 West and Fulton Industrial, that's the biggest average transaction. So that small space out there has never been a lot of it. The other markets, yeah, it's tight. Rates are going to go up. And unless we have another recession like we just went through, and we've been through 2 of those in 100 years that are that deep, I don't see that changing because for a couple of reasons. There is really no place to, first of all, the 2 to 10,000 are probably serving Metro Atlanta. They probably can't go out to Jackson County or south of McDonough and serve the Metro Atlanta area. It's just too far with the Atlanta traffic. And so they want to be closer in. There are no more industrial land sites closer in that could be built on. A lot of the industrial in the Chattahoochee Industrial Armor is a perfect example, is being repurposed. So you're losing supply close in. There's no more industrial land. And even if there were, to make the numbers work on new construction in that square footage, 2,000 square feet, you'd be north of $10 a foot. There's only one development that I can think of in Metro Atlanta that is, a modern building, tilt wall building, and that is catering to the 5 to 10,000 square foot units, and that's in out 316. They're at about $7.25 to $7.50, which is substantially more than the rates I gave you just a little bit. So you got to have more rent appreciation to justify new construction, and then where are you going to put it? So unless we have a severe downturn with a lot of negative net absorption, I think the upward pressure on the small building rates is going to continue.
I've seen in the areas that I work a renewed interest in land. talk to us a little bit about land prices, say up to 85 quarter, 400 quarter, 75. What are you seeing for sewered and unsewered property?
Well, I might have to throw that one back at you. I'm not a land specialist in general. Land prices are up. And if I had to make a swag northeast, I'd say for sewered land, you're probably 125 to 175 an acre.
Your company has a couple of lots in Bristol Industrial, it's off of Friendship, and they're $165,000 to $175,000 an acre. I've got a couple of lots up in Oakwood that 125 to 150 an acre. They have sewer. I haven't sold a unsewered lot in a long time. Yeah, there's some out there, I suppose, but I haven't sold any.
I think most, we're in a funny market right now where the world economics are driving industrial real estate development. Everybody's building mostly really big buildings. There's no shortage of those in the metro area, with the intent of leasing it up to Home Depot for 20 years and flipping it to an institution. So those people will not buy land. The exit strategy, they won't buy land that's not sewered. And as a practical matter, I wouldn't put an industrial building on a sewered system. All you need is an employee emptying his safety clean sink down the toilet. The whole idea of a septic system is to spread it around. If you're an industrial building with industrial things going on, you could contaminate your septic system and spread it out pretty wide pretty easily. Now, small individual metal building parks and stuff, a lot of times you don't have a choice. You just need to monitor what your employees are doing very carefully.
An example of basically a land deal, we just closed the Bluffs out off of Riverside, and Duke Realty bought it, and it was 50-something acres, probably 32 usable, and that worked out to about 160 to 130 to 160 respectively per acre, and their plans are to tear the building down. So location, they were willing to pay a premium price for the property because of where it's at, and probably they have a tenant in tow that is ready to take it. Talk to us about building cost. We did a 9,000 square foot building up in Buford. And it ended up, and this is a metal building with a brick facade in the front, $100 a foot. That's excluding land, and it had 3-phase power, a couple of bathrooms. Does that run true from what you're seeing in building cost?
Yes. Building costs are up right now. You've had, I think, labor driving that as much as anything, and the fact that everybody's got a lot of work to do. The contractors will quote it and say, well, I'm busy, but if he'll pay me this for it, I'll squeeze it in and make time for it because I get a good return on it. So I think it's more labor-driven. Commodity prices still have not, well, concrete's still up, but yeah, $100 a square foot for a small building, even if it's metal, doesn't surprise me at all because, you still got to pave it, you got to do the truck court, you got to do the civil, retention areas, all of that kind of stuff gets thrown into the building costs. Office square footage for small increments of office are up to $100 a square foot. To build out 1,000, 2,000 square feet of office, it's going to cost you $100 a square foot. For most of my career, that's been between $40 and $50 a square foot. Even your bigger buildings are going up. Time you include the land on some of these million square foot buildings, they're in them in the upper 40s. And they used to do those buildings way less than that.
The days the $40 a square foot building are gone.
No, I don't see them coming back.
Where do investors need to start building again? And I haven't seen a lot of that, but they're starting to a little bit. Where would you suggest a investor go out and build a 50,000 multi-tenant building of 2,000 to 5,000 square foot increments? Anywhere?
Probably not the 2,000 square foot increments. If you were going to build a 50 divisible down to the 5 to 10 to 15s, anywhere you can find the land close in where you can make the numbers work. I just spoke with a developer last week, that has found an infill site over in the Tucker Stone Mountain area, an area that's been overlooked for people for years, and where he's talking about building and the product he's talking about building, I think he's going to do very well. And, you know, I told him he'd probably now he's going to be bigger than that. His 30,000 square foot and larger, I forgot the size of the building he was going to build, maybe 150, but he's going to pro forma 450 a foot, and I think he can get it. I think you can get it for a modern tilt wall, high ceiling ESFR building over there. So for the smaller square footages, if you can find land at a price you can make the numbers work with construction, I'd build it. Because like I said earlier, those smaller tenants usually need to be more centralized, and you can't find the land to build it.
You know, have you seen municipalities take a dim or negative view of industrial real estate?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. An example, I don't know how many people have done something in Beaufort recently, but it's a nightmare. I'm sure every one of here that probably has experienced some very similar trades, but what are you seeing? I guess Beaufort's not the only one that's causing problems.
No, industrial is the stepchild of development. Nobody really wants the industrial in their backyard. Now, the fact of the matter, most of the Atlanta industrial is stuff you wouldn't mind being next to. Atlanta, by and large, is a distribution city. We don't have, I would make a swag that it's 80% distribution, 20% manufacturing. Very little heavy manufacturing practically doesn't exist in Atlanta. And the buildings are nice looking, well landscaped, so I don't really understand the pushback, but a lot of these, and now particularly since you've had this trend in Atlanta, used to be you had Atlanta and Norcross and a few, now everything is incorporated. So now you've got all these little fiefdoms with the people on the city councils, and they'll decide what they'd like in their area, and they will zone for it, regardless of whether there's any demand for it or not. They're just going to zone for it, and it's going to show up because they zoned for it. Classic example, I had some buildings in Chamblee, and zoned industrial. The use was clearly allowed in the industrial, very clearly in the code. And they said, well, it's been vacant for more than 6 months, so we deem it abandoned. And if it's been abandoned, you have to put it back in line to all the current codes. You know, codes tend to get stricter over the years. And I said, okay, well, what do we need to do about it? Well, here are the variances you needed. And we'll be easy on you. Just apply for these 3 variances. So I run down there with a check for $500 because it's $100 per variance. Go to the city council meeting. They got a little girl, looks like she just graduated college in city planning, that they've hired to do city planning. And we asked for the variances, and they turned us down on every one of them. And after they said they were going to be real easy to us. Well, the fact of the matter is, we couldn't comply with the current codes. The current codes were building had to have a facade 30 feet high. You can do that. It's going to cost a lot of money. You can do that. Can't see dock doors from the street. Well, this is a front-loading building. I got nowhere else to put the dock doors. Can't have but one driveway entrance. Well, the one's for the truck and there's one for the parking. I can't do anything about that. I can't convert the building to heavy office. I don't have enough parking to it. So it was effective condemnation. We ended up, after we were turned down, filing suit against the city and the city councilman personally. And then we had a meeting, and basically they backed off, and and all we were trying to do was to lease in the current zoning something that was clearly allowed under the current zoning, and they were saying we couldn't do it. And if we had been able physically to do what they wanted us to do, it would have been 10 years worth of rental income to make those changes. So it just, no common sense, and it's gotten worse now that you've got all the little municipalities and, people telling you what you need to do with your property.
I'll give you an example that I just went through in Covington, Georgia. We had this was a commercial building, about a 8,000 square foot automotive center, beautiful little building, had all the lifts, the building was sprinkled, it was absolutely nothing wrong with the building. It was pristine for an automotive center. It had, and what Bill said was if these municipalities are, if a building is empty for a period of time, and that period of time changes per wherever you're at. Theirs was a year, I believe, and this building had been vacant for about 2 years. It's always been an automotive. Goodyear and Amco, both were in the building at one time. Their rules and regs says if a building is empty, you have to go back through a special use permit. Now, keep in mind the special use permit had been granted to Amco about 3 years ago. Nothing had changed with the building. No different use. There was a senior citizens housing project right behind the building. They came out en masse and objected it, and it just so happened that elections were coming up this November. We were turned down to put an automotive use in an automotive building. And this was no crappy building. I mean, it was beautiful. No, sir. So, as Bill said, our next step, it has to be a lawsuit. But we're seeing that in a lot of these places. That this one was commercial based on a residential, people objecting to it, but I'm seeing it, and I mentioned Buford. Hope nobody's here on the city council in Buford here today, but they're getting very difficult to deal with. Bill, let's talk about cap rates and the returns on investment. Where are you seeing returns on institutional buyers, mid-range buyers, and an individual just looking for a 1031 exchange or some income?
A little bit all over the board. If it's really institutional quality, 1 million square foot tilt wall building, the Duracell building comes to mind down the 85 South Leg, developed by Core 5. Duracell had a plant in Columbus. It was closest place for them to put a really big distribution center, and they leased that thing up. And all the bids they had come in when they put it on the market were under 5%. Every bid they had was under 5%. That building traded at, I'm going from memory, but I'm close, $71 to $72 a foot. That's for a 1 million square foot big tilt wall building. Now, and that's the competitive environment we're in, and that's a function of there's a lot of liquidity in the world. Pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, foreign money, all looking for a return anywhere they can get it. You know, through most of my life, 5% return on a CD was a reasonable assumption. You can't get returns for your liquid anymore, and it is, so they're just driving it into real estate. 4.8% sounds good by comparison. Now, they're not underwriting them correctly, in my opinion, either. They're not putting it's 10-year lease, 15-year lease. They're not factoring any vacancy in there. Well, those buildings come back. World may have changed. Maybe they've decided 4 or 5 big million square footers is not as good as 10, 200,000 square footers as critical time becomes more important. Those big buildings come back. They might be vacant 2, 3, 4 years. So that'll really knock down your 4.8% return if it sits vacant for 2 or 3 years after a 10-year lease. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me right now, so I don't do a lot of investment deal for that matter. Your smaller guys, local credit tenant, multi-tenant buildings, you're still in the 8-9% range, which kind of makes a little more sense.
What about rail use? Where do you see that going? Where is it now?
I think it's going to stay about where it is now. I don't think it's going to grow much. The railroads have tried, the two major railroads serving Metro Atlanta, Norfolk Southern, and CSX. Rail-served buildings with active rail are rare. CSX sold all of their Fulton Industrial properties, which was the bulk of their rail properties in Atlanta, to a short line railroad. Still hooks directly up to CSX, but it's not technically CSX anymore. And the railroads themselves do not want to ship door to door. They do not want to do boxcar type shipments. There are exceptions. There are a few products that really rail makes a lot of sense. Bulk plastics, pellets when you're blowing stuff. Those you've seen the big silos where they pipe it into the building and put it in the machines. Liquids, chemical manufacturing, heavy goods, really heavy goods. Rolled paper. I've got a client that does a great deal of rolled paper. Those things are heavy, so they like to bring them in on trucks. But the railroad really wants to get out. Their business has been good, but it's because of the containers and the piggyback. They want to get out of the door-to-door shipment. They want to send it the bulk of the way to an intermodal yard. We have 3 in Atlanta, 3 major ones in Atlanta, 3 or 4, and just take the container off the piggyback, put it to a truck, and for the last mile, carry it via truck to the. So rail's still important, but going from building to building, with the exception of a few industries, I don't see that changing much.
Rooker bought Shannon Mall a few years ago and is retrofitting it to an industrial use. Do you see that as a trend for some of these? Take Gwinnett Mall. In my opinion, that's kind of ripe for that type of change.
The thing I love about industrial real estate in particular is it's all a big math problem. And you start with the rent that you think you can achieve, and from there you back into the number you can afford to pay for the land. Taking out construction costs, lease up time, those kind of things. So you can pretty easily determine what you can pay for the land. Shannon Mall was in such horrible disrepair. No alternative use there to speak of. You're not going to build a city in a city where that thing was located. It was one of those rare exceptions. And industrial real estate has the lowest rental rates of any commercial real estate out there. So you're handicapped by what you can achieve in that. He did really well with that project. It was leased practically before it was done. It was a great geographic location. It was literally 200 or 300 yards off the exit ramp. I think that was the exception. You mentioned Gwinnett Place Mall. I think the land value is going to be such underneath that mall that it'll be something else other than industrial. So because you're limited by the rents you can achieve on industrial, and industrial being the low end of the commercial market out of retail, office, multifamily, I just don't see a lot of redevelopment happening for industrial. I have seen a lot of industrial be rehabilitated for something else. Armor Yards comes to mind, where they're converting it to the loft office type concept. But as long as the land values stay up or the real estate has an alternative use that'll pay higher rents than industrial, I don't see a lot of that on the horizon.
Several years ago, there's hundreds of these older buildings. You mentioned Armor, all over Metro Atlanta. 12-foot ceilings, 100-amp panels, very little parking, truck courts, awful. Several years ago, there was discussion about raising the roofs on buildings to accommodate at least higher ceilings. Was that ever done with any buildings? Do you see that as a trend? What kind of costs are involved there?
I have seen it done on rare occasion. I don't have a current cost for that. Years ago, there was a national firm. They said they'd raise roofs and make functionally obsolete buildings functional again. Well, 14 clear works for a lot of distribution items if you can't rack it, if you need to floor stack it. So that functionally obsolete's a word that I kind of try to stay away from, because it'll work for some people. It won't, work for your Home Depots in the e-commerce business, but it'll work for somebody. I don't know. I think your prices in certain areas of town are getting close enough that that might make sense. Years ago, that procedure you're talking about was about $20 a square foot. Well, when buildings are selling for 20, 25 bucks a square foot, you're doubling the cost of the building. It just economically didn't make sense. Now those buildings are selling for Northeast, a moderate-sized building, and I'm talking about a masonry building, a tilt wall, brick and block. You're in the $60, $70 a square foot range. So, but I don't have a current estimate on what it takes to raise a roof. But if it was still $20 and you could buy one for $50, it might make sense. But a lot of times the low ceiling roofs also are constrained by a very tight truck court that's limited because of the land, and you can't do anything about that.
So it makes sense probably just to tear the building down if the location and the land is would fit your geographical needs.
And you get back to economics. What probably would make even more sense would be to find somebody that only needs a 14. I sold one in Fulton Industrial last year. Prices have gone up dramatically in Fulton Industrial. I sold the first building down there at $30 a square foot about 3 years ago, and now it's not uncommon at all for things to exceed, which is still way, way below replacement cost. But I had a guy looking for a 15,000 square foot building. They're always hard to find. They're particularly hard to find on that side of the line, side of Atlanta, because they tend to be bigger. We ended up selling him a 30,000 square foot building that was 12 clear. If you only needed 15 with an 18-foot ceiling height, obviously 30 at 12 works fine. I pointed out to him that, he's going to face nothing's forever, and I like to go into every transaction with a potential exit strategy. One day he's going to have the same problem when he tries to sell it, and you'll be looking. So you'll still be below the bulk of the buildings, and whatever the average buildings in the market, they'll be here. You're going to be here. Well, we bought the building here, and he's happy as he can be with it. And looking back, that was just last year. I think we bought that building about $18.50 a foot. That'd be a steal today.
Now, don't y'all laugh at this question. Well, you're already laughing. Have you been approached by anyone for the legal marijuana growing operation for an industrial building here in Metro Atlanta?
I have not. I don't, like I said earlier, I don't do a lot of listings. I have leased one to an illegal. Years ago, I was handling a building in the Fulton Industrial for the Kuniansky family. Gentleman out of California came in, well-spoken. He said he was in partnership with Tyler Perry doing the movie sets, and he needed a place to store the sets off. Well-spoken. It seemed legitimate. He had money. We leased it to him, and he was in there 2-3 years. And I wake up one morning and read about the raid in the paper where he had the hydroponics growing it inside there. And, I was occasionally, I read folks pretty good on initial meetings, but occasionally you can get fooled. And I, was worried about the Kuniansky family, who I've done a lot of business with over the years, being mad with me about it. And Kevin said, "Now, can we get another one?" He paid rent like clockwork. But when they suspect it, they go to the power company and get the records, because those things use an enormous amount of electricity. But he was in there operating for 3.5 years, and then they started kind of selling out the back door rather than manufacturing, going somewhere else and selling it. And that's how it caught up with them.
Building prices up the Northeast, to give you two comps. I sold a building a couple of months ago. It was $10,200 for $74 a square foot. Nice little building, brick, 3 sides. There was a building, a C at best building off of Peachtree Industrial that sold last year for $82 a foot. Are you seeing?
Did it have any extra land with it, the 82 one?
I'm sorry?
Did the $82 foot have
Very
any extra?
little.
Okay.
Very little. Are you seeing similar prices for a product of that size in other areas?
Yeah, yes. Up 400, you're going to be pushing 90 for a small metal building with brick facade, nice looking building.
And that's still cheaper.
Well,
than
that's
the
what
building.
I was going to point out. You just brought up you'd done a build-to-suit about that size for $100 before you put in the land, and if you factor in the land, you're only going to get about 30% coverage. So from that, you can back into amount of acreage you need, and then you got to do the civil work. You're going to be well, I would speculate $120 a foot or more. So if you're buying it at 90, you're still buying it way below replacement cost.
My thoughts about industrial real estate is that everything that comes into the southeast comes into Atlanta for all intent and purposes, either by rail, truck, train, or sea from Savannah. And if this chapter went down to Savannah a couple of months ago, if you've never seen that operation, you should go. It's very, very nice, and it's amazing just to stand beside one of these ships that come in. If you haven't gone, go see it. But I see here in the southeast industrial doing well for years, unless there's some major international problem. I hope we don't have that. But still, the southeast is where the growth is. It's not going to change. It's going to get better or worse, whichever side, part of the coin you're on there. But that's my opinion. Bill, yours?
I think the southeast is still, you've got for these, and the logistics on these things are changing. I've never seen a market so in flux and driven mainly by everybody trying to figure out what Amazon's going to do next. Interestingly, what enabled the South to really grow and why it lagged behind the Northeast for hundreds of years was the invention of air conditioning. It made it habitable down here. And that's when the South really started to take off. And right now, or at least in the last few years, the trend has been maybe have one mega distribution center in about 5 locations: Atlanta, Dallas, Texas area, LA area, Chicago, and kind of in that New Jersey area, and you could get all the population in a 2-day UPS trip from out of those 5 warehouses. That was the trend for a good long time. Of course, now Amazon is trying to get it to you within 2 hours, and that's, I don't know how all that is yet to shake out. I don't think any of us do. It's going to continue to evolve. And when I mentioned earlier, instead of having those 5, if you're trying to get it there in 1-day UPS, then maybe you need to do 10 half that size or 20 a quarter that size. So I'm not sure that's through shaking out yet. And if, Lord knows, with the prices they're paying for these million square foot plus, if those get out of trend, I don't know what the people are going to do with those things. Years ago, first instance I saw of this, Ford had a distribution center back in it. Kurt, you remember when they did that build-to-suit down there at Ford, 650,000 square feet. That was the biggest building Atlanta had seen. It was only 24 clear. These days that'd be 36, might be 40. And Ford was to supply their part suppliers. Well, anybody that's carried there's so many various models of cars over the years. Your dealer doesn't stock parts for your car for the most part. Yeah, he's got oil parts, he's got tire, he's got stuff he changes daily, but if there's anything that's broken, he's going to get it from the distribution center. And you want your car the next day at worst case. So Ford shut that down and went back and opened up 100,000 square foot and a lot more of them, so they'd be in 1 day. So as long as the dealer got that order in by 3:34 that day, they had the part the next morning. So that's an example. Now that goes back 15 years probably, but an example of how I see things could change on these mega distribution centers. And all that's still, it's changing daily.
I'll open it up for any questions now that or comments that anyone might have. Did we do that good a job? Please.
That's Kennesaw.
Kennesaw.
Kennesaw. Yes, that's a good market. The Northwest market is a unique market. Cobb County has been a major county for a lot longer than Gwinnett County, say, or Forsyth County. So it's built out and it's mature. And the bulk of the industrial, if you take an industrial parks map and look at everything zoned industrial and put your thumb over Lockheed, which obviously is not on the market, it's a fairly thin market. And you've got a lot of decision makers live in East Cobb, corporate executives. So those guys that make decisions don't like to drive very far. So you've got high demand, limited supply. That's always been a good market. It's a market that is, and normally a city grows out from the center. Northwest market, you run into the foothills and the mountains pretty quickly. And because industrial is the lowest lease rates, you can only afford to pay so much for land, and you can't grade the side of a damn mountain and make your land price work. So that further constrains supply up that way. And in answer to your question, that building is going to be in demand for lease or for sale, whichever you want to do. I'm trying to place the building right now, but in my mind, huh? Okay, yeah, do that. But yeah, you'll do well with that building, and if you say you want to handle it, I'll do it.
I get a finder's fee on this, don't I?
Yes.
Okay. And welcome to the South.
I just had a real quick question in terms of, you said the rental rates outpacing the growth of some of these businesses. Are there 2 or 3 strategies from a tenant rep's perspective that you are able to, advise your clients on about how they're structuring their leases or things of that nature to help them with these drastic increases in the price for their space that they're renting due to the lack of supply that's caused by the market?
It's painful right now, being a tenant rep broker. My best, we're overdue for a recession. I would guess we're going to have one in the next couple of years. But recessions have only twice in my career resulted in negative net absorption in Atlanta. You might have a quarter here and there, but not annual. Now, we had the dot-com bust followed by not too much longer after that 9/11. We had like 7 or 8 quarters of negative net absorption. And then we had this, whatever you call it, we just went through starting in 2007, and we had a couple of years worth of negatives in net absorption. Both of those seem to be extreme to me. If we have a normal recession, prices, you got to have a lot of vacancy where landlords are competing against each other for prices to drop. I think it's going to be a while before we see that again, long while. And if I can get a lease rate that is very competitive right now, I am telling my clients to sign the lease for as long as they are comfortable. How far out can you see with your business? Let's sign the lease for that long, because my best guess is they're going to be higher yet next time. But don't have a lot of leverage in a lot of this stuff. Industrial is unique. You're going to move an office building. You can an office user, you can do that in a weekend. Get everything teed up, move it across. Industrial, not that way. People don't move industrial warehouses to get a nicer looking building. They move industrial warehouses because they're constrained and they could make more money if they were in a bigger one, or they're in too much space because technology's changed and they downsize. There's a reason. So if the size is the same, in most instances I work out a renewal at a little bit below the current market and they stay put.
Anyone else? Bill was kind enough to bring some what they call the point of view. It's a breakdown of each area in Atlanta, and some of the trends. We've got about 50 copies. Please take one. It'll some great information there. You're welcome to take one. I'd like to, Bill, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
It's
Well, thank you, Bill and Wes, for a wonderfully informative program. That was great. Thank you, Gary, for being here all the way from Southern California. Please remember to join us on September 14th for our next chapter program. Please spread the word on our economic luncheon. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.